And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Wednesday, November 7th. I am the host for today's program, Paul DeMain, and many of the stories we read here can also be found at our websites, IndianCountryNews.com and IndianCountryTV.com, and here are some of the news stories for the day. President Barack Obama, re-elected to his second term with a strong turnout in support of Indian country, thanked his supporters from throughout the United States, including specifically the Native American vote during his re-election speech late on the night of November 6th. The strong Native vote turnout will no doubt be analyzed from all kinds of perspectives in the next few weeks, but the National Congress of American Indians, NCAI, was hailing the results of the 2012 election, including the re-election of Obama, as a historic moment for advancing the trust relationship between tribal nations and the federal government. NCAI called for leaders in Indian country and the United States government to seize this moment and advance the nation-to-nation relationship between tribes and the United States. Natives were taking credit for the margin of victory in Senate races in Montana, which favored Democrat Jon Tester, and in North Dakota, Democratic Heidi Heitkamp, who defeated Republican Rick Berg in a very close North Dakota Senate race. Heitkamp's win was a surprise to many national political pundits reflecting on the race, as was the election of Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin's Senate race, where former Bush Health and Social Services Director, Republican Tommy Thompson, lost to Baldwin, helping to keep the U.S. Senate in control of the Democrats. There are now two Native Americans in the U.S. Congress. Chickasaw incumbent Representative Tom Cole, a Republican from Oklahoma, who defeated his challenger, as did Cherokee Mark Wayne Mullin, another Republican in the state dominated by the red. John O.C. Guerrera Paiute was not successful in his bid for Congress in Nevada, but Elizabeth Warren, who has claimed Cherokee Delaware heritage, won her Senate seat in Massachusetts. It could be that Warren could become an ally now that the controversy over her heritage has been settled politically, at least in Massachusetts. Representative Don Young, Republican from Alaska, current head of the House Subcommittee on Indian and Alaska Native Affairs, also won re-election. In two of several tribal elections held on November 6th, Barry Snyder Sr. has been elected president of the Senaca Nation of Indians for a fifth time, returning to a post he last held from 2008 to 2010. The tribe announced November 6th that Snyder had received 929 votes compared to 704 for Tribal Council Chairman Richard Nephew. Four other candidates also ran for president of the 8,000-member tribe. And with over 4,400 votes cast, the Pine Ridge Ogalala Sioux Tribe has elected Brian Brewer over John Yellowbird Steele, while returning as Vice President Tom Poorbear over William Shorty Brewer. And now we talk with Shoshone Bannock tribal member Mark Trahant for a final presidential election roundup. Mark Trahant, thanks for joining us again on the Native News Update today. Give me your impression about our presidential election and what happened throughout the country here on November 6th with the Native vote, which we understand turned out in heavy numbers.
Well, I think that's the big story, is the Native vote was just extraordinary. And as we talked about before, I saw it when I traveled across Montana and just saw how organized Native communities were in that very important Senate race. True as well in Wisconsin, just across the board. Aside from candidates, the single biggest winner in this election was the Affordable Care Act and the Indian Health Care Improvement Act. There is absolutely no route now for repeal, at least for the next 4 to 6 years. But that means shift the conversation to how do we execute this and make it an effective piece of legislation, and how do we fund it, and how do we make sure it works?
Right, because the Health Care Act brought with us all the components of Indian health service and potential shifts in policy and funding levels.
Right.
Will we be able to meet those now? Is that what you're saying? It's a clear road for implementation?
Well, absolutely. And let me give you an example. Right now, about 30% of the Indian health system budget comes from Medicaid. Medicaid, unlike IHS, is not appropriated. If you're eligible, the money is there. So if you can ratchet that up from 30% to 50%, 60%, which is certainly feasible under the Affordable Care Act, maybe even more, suddenly you get a great boost of income into the Indian health system. I think one of the larger questions for the country is that if you look at the deficit and long-term financial obligations, all of that really boils down to healthcare. And if you can fix healthcare, you can fix the deficit. And the Indian health system spends just about what the rest of the world spends. If you could get the U.S. to spend roughly that same number, we would have a deficit.
Indeed, when we're looking at that policy, there was a lot of other things that Romney had proposed for elimination, from Big Bird to FEMA to several other, perhaps the Department of Interior, HUD. Something was going to go in his formula of things. Does Indian country have to keep an eye out, generally speaking, for its budget levels in the next 2 to 4 years? And where do you think we're going to fare with that?
We're going to have some tough fights. The House is still Republican. Austerity is a clear movement. And what's unfortunate both with Congress and to an extent with the administration, even Obama, is the idea that domestic dependent spending, which is just about 6% of the budget, can somehow pay for the hole we're in. And that's just not the case. The really big ticket items are three things: military, interest on the debt, and Medicare and Medicaid.
So they really have to work on that, Medicaid, and getting that deficit down and not burn the money up on the interest end of payments.
Yeah, we're lucky right now because interest rates are so low. If they start to creep up, that's going to make a really hard impact on the federal spending program.
In viewing the horizon across Indian country, has anything popped up as fairly unique on the front of Native people either participating or running for office across the country that you saw last night?
Some good candidates, I think. Some to watch, like Denise Juneau. Again, that Montana vote was there, turned out, and she cruised to a re-election. I think you're going to see more quality candidates start to take a look and say, you know, I ought to jump into this as well.
You saw the figures, for example, in our local county here, which historically, almost for a century, was considered to be a solid red county. In the last presidential election, it went marginally for Obama. Last night, it went to Obama by 46 votes. There was a clear message in the final township, Bass Lake, Story County, reservation voted district, that came in and delivered over 380 votes margin plus to Obama, leaving the county blue rather than red. Do we see that dynamic growing more often across the country?
And where that really is significant, like Wisconsin, is what's happened in the past is you'd get the urban areas rolling up big margins for the Democrats, and that would get erased by the rural counties that turn in red votes. To have a Native community wipe out that advantage suddenly tips the scales in ways that are very potentially impactful.
Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico, Montana. Are we seeing anything that's is there ever going to be a Democratic bastion evolving out of the Alabama tribes or anything like that? Or?
A lot of the southern tribes still vote Republican. That's an important thing. And I haven't looked at the numbers this time around, but what's really interesting is that Bill Clinton did carry some southern Oklahoma counties,
right?
Those near Arkansas, and Obama, 4 years ago, didn't carry a single one, including Indian majority districts. And it'll be interesting to actually go through the numbers and see if that's still the case.
Do we see at a national level, like through NCAI, the basis for a coalition of what we call the tribal tipping point? That is we have Republicans and Democrats who come together, share that similar goal of local elected officials. Can we work together if the rest of the country can't?
I think so. And I'll give you an example. Here at Fort Hall, not a huge community, roughly 5,000 tribal members. Well, the tribe had its voter education project, and they invited candidates to come and to make their pitch to tribal members. Well, they had planned on maybe 10 legislative candidates, prosecutor, that sort of thing, to show up. 14 showed up. In fact, there are almost more candidates than tribal members. but it really shows the significance of that working together. Both Republicans and Democrats had a great conversation, and I think that's just laying the groundwork for future such enterprises.
All right, Mark, we'll let you go for today. The election is over. We're going to have to catch up with you probably within the next 4 years to see what's going on for the next election. And Hillary Clinton has her eyeball on that, maybe?
She has more opportunity now, that's for sure.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining with us again, Mark.
Okay.
And finally, we go to Patty Talahongva, Hopi, who is going to give some insight into the Indian vote out of the Southwest and in particular, Arizona. Welcome to the Native News Update, Patty Talahongva. Tell us a little bit about where you're reporting from and give us an update. We're interested in knowing what the Native vote did and where you are today with some of the counting that still continues.
Very interesting race here in Arizona, Paul. Of course, the one race that a lot of people are watching here is in the Legislative District 1, which is Ann Kirkpatrick, the Democratic candidate, who is facing Jonathan Patton. And right now, it's too close to call. However, they are still counting ballots on the Navajo Nation that could very well impact her win in this case. And she has a slight lead there. But it could be days before all of those votes are counted, as well as provisional ballots. So that race is still up in the air, and that's in northern Arizona. In southern Arizona, the race for Gabrielle Gifford's seat is also still way too close to call. So again, a few more days before an actual victor will be announced in that race. And down south, you have the Tohono O'odham people and also the Pasquayaqui people who, if they're not right in the district, they are certainly in that area within the urban setting there. And then, of course, the U.S. Senate race, which was Jeff Flake against Richard Carmona. That race has been decided. Jeff Flake, the Republican, will take that office, and across the state, a lot of Native people were voting for the Democratic candidate, Richard Carmona, because he supports Obamacare. And of course, within the Obamacare, Indian Health Services is affected. And in the presidential race, Arizona went red, as expected, but so, no surprise there.
Well, let me ask you a question or two, because I noticed that as the election went along, Arizona, which has usually been bright red, actually turned pink for a while, which said that it went into the leaning rather than solid red column. There's some people that are suggesting that with a pickup of registered Native voters and a increase in the number of Latino voters in Arizona, that you were beginning to see a trend going toward more purple. At least it went light pink. What do we know about that?
Well, yes, it's pink, purple-ish, and one of the things with the National Congress of American Indians about the Native vote, that translated into tribes here in Arizona who were also pushing their people to register and then show up at the polling places. Last night, I was at both the Democratic headquarters as well as the Republican headquarters watching the returns. And it was interesting because at the Republican headquarters, I interviewed Greg Mendoza, who is the governor of Gila River Indian community, and he was supporting Mitt Romney. And then at the Democratic headquarters, I ran into his lieutenant governor, Stephen Lewis, who, of course, was supporting President Obama. So we all talked about that effort to get the vote out, no matter which side you happen to be on, which party you belong to, and also with the understanding that this in these next few years, and of course in the future, this idea of working together, coming back and being more compromising and finding that middle ground where you can make progress as opposed to having this stalemate that's been going on for so long. So even within one tribe, the two top leaders, the elected leaders of one tribe, are on opposite sides of the aisle. and yet they work together for the betterment of one community. And I looked around, talked to several people at, again, both party locations, and it was really heartened to see people just out there and being involved. And I came across one family with two young sons, 12, 11, I believe, and 15. And they were so supportive of President Obama and knew the process, understood issues. I was very impressed with these two young men being there. And in fact, the 15-year-old actually went to the Democratic National Convention and talked endlessly about the Native American caucus, so reaching out, and one of them even said, "We are the future, so we need to know these things." And then just walking around and seeing the tone of the rooms was interesting as well. At the Republican headquarters, the people who had gathered in circles, holding hands, and they were praying, and it was just totally spontaneous supporters there. So interesting night, and interesting next 4 years.
Okay, and is it just quickly, one last question before we go. You're doing a little break up there on the last one, but is the native vote not only a tipping capability if they were to go to the right or left, but the chances in the future would appear to be better that we're going to see more native indigenous people involved in the political process on one side or the other, or perhaps even as independents?
I think most likely, yes, but that goes back to tribal leadership in getting their people registered and also getting them to the polls. And again, Gila River, they did a really excellent job of calling. They had volunteers coming in with, at a phone bank and calling all of their people saying, don't forget to show up and vote. So absolutely. I think, again, it comes back to what are the individual tribes doing to get that involvement. National Congress of American Indians can make an effort, and organizations like the Intertribal Council of Arizona can make the effort, but it means something if your own leadership calling you and saying, hey, don't forget to register to vote and don't forget to actually go to the polls and vote.
Well, we noted that some tribal people said there was actually candidates knocking on their doors out on the reservation, which is a little bit different, and they just appreciated the fact that their vote was, valued in some way. Patty, Patty, thanks for joining with us, and we'll touch base with you a little bit more, hopefully in the next couple weeks or so, and get some updates from Arizona. We appreciate your time today. And that is another roundup of news from Indian Country. On this edition of the Native News Update, we want to thank you for joining with us and come back again soon.